Turkish Airlines presents Business Africa.
Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I'm India Yoka. Let's take a look at the headlines. Malaria costs lives in Africa and up to $16 billion a year. A Japanese startup is deploying drones and AI to transform the fight against the scourge. In Nigeria, African sovereign wealth funds want to break away from dependence on foreign aid. The aim is to rely on their own resources to finance sustainable growth. And in Niger, the temporary ban on livestock exports left herders drained, and the return to normal is not making up for the losses. Behind every mosquito lies a major economic loss. With operations in several African countries, the startup Sora is banking on data and technology to prevent epidemics at the source.
Up to $16 billion in GDP are lost each year due to malaria in Africa, a major barrier to development, according to the World Economic Forum. Eliminating the disease could unlock significant economic potential across the continent. In 2023, malaria was responsible for the death of 569,000 people in Africa, according to the World Health Organization. But malaria does not only kill, it also weakens local economies. The African continent is scaling up its response to the disease, thanks in part to vaccines. But growing resistance to medication is making the fight even harder, while traditional prevention methods remain costly and poorly targeted. In response to this challenge, technology is offering new solutions. A Japanese startup, Sora Technology, is deploying smart drones equipped with artificial intelligence in Ghana, Kenya, and Sierra Leone. These drones precisely identify and target mosquito breeding areas to drop larvicides with high efficiency. The results are promising. Up to 40% savings on prevention costs, a 70% reduction in insecticide use, and a 50% drop in labor costs. With $4.8 million raised in May 2025, Sora plans to expand its operations to 6 African countries while developing more autonomous drones and more powerful AI systems. The company exhibited its cutting-edge technology at the Africa Tech Summit held in Nairobi in February. For founder Yusuke Kaneko, the stakes go beyond public health. The aim is to strengthen local capacity, reduce reliance on external aid, and build a virtuous circle for sustainable development in Africa.
To discuss this, we joined this week by Yusuke Kaneko, founder of Sora Technology, who explains how innovation can change the game against malaria. Monsieur Kaneko, welcome to Business Africa. Malaria costs Africa an estimated $16 billion a year in economic losses. How does Sora Technology position itself as both an economic and health lever?
The solution developed by Sora Technology relies on a combined use of artificial intelligence and drones to precisely identify areas at risk of malaria transmission and then apply insecticides in a targeted manner based on the data collected and the identified needs.
Last month, you raised $4.8 million. What will this funding be used for specifically, and how do you plan to roll out your operations across the continent?
The funds we have raised this time will be used to expand across the entire African continent, an initiative that has already proven successful in Ghana. Specifically, these funds will allow us to deploy operational teams on the ground and finance the support provided to local ministries of health in the implementation and integration of this technology.
Resistance to anti-malarial drugs is a growing concern. Can your technology allow you to anticipate or adapt the fight against this new threat?
This type of canister system, in other words cartridge-based, presents a major challenge regarding resistance to product. Why? Because if resistance to insecticides develops, it becomes necessary to create a new generation of drugs or product, which entails extremely high cost. Our solution allows a direct reduction in the amount of products used, which significantly extends the time before resistance develops. Instead of an insecticide becoming ineffective quickly, it can be used for a longer period. This significantly reduces the overall investment required, and our solution is also highly regarded in terms of cost effectiveness.
In the context of US budget cuts, how can your model fill the gap left by international aid? And what types of public-private partnerships work best for you?
Yes, until now, we have been entirely dependent on public funding. But the fact that this funding is decreasing this time represents, on the contrary, an opportunity for the private sector to enter this market, because global health, in particular, is not an expense but an investment. It is an investment to create new industries such as drones or satellite, and to truly integrate these solutions into society and obtain concrete data. It is important to start in the places that need it most in the world, and I believe that place is Africa. These data are not only useful for Africa, but also sought after worldwide, especially data related to new infectious diseases. This is why in our case, our investors are not from Africa but Japanese investors funding projects in Africa.
特に新しい感染症のデータは欲しがってます。なので、我々の投資家にはアフリカではなくて、実は日本の投資家がアフリカの事業に対して投資をしているというバックグラウンドがあります。
Monsieur Kaneko, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
In Abuja, heads of African sovereign wealth funds want to take action by financing strategic projects. To do this, they're focusing on energy, infrastructure and agribusinesses.
In Abuja, representatives of African sovereign wealth funds, financial institutions and international partners gathered for the 4th edition of the African Sovereign Investors Forum. The goal is to mobilize more global capital to finance transformative projects across the continent.
To build a solid African sovereign wealth fund, experts here say the continent needs to collaborate, cooperate, and channel most of its resources into the continent.
We have to truly change our mindsets and leverage the money that we already have here to ensure it's going into pivotal projects. We need to use African sovereign wealth funds to catalyze investments, and investments that will change the path of our different countries by creating jobs, and not just jobs for the sake of it, but green jobs, sustainable jobs, and create income and wealth across the board.
Several memoranda of understanding were signed, boosting South-South cooperation. Nigeria, through the NSIA, aims to play a leading role in this new continental strategy.
So for it to be scalable and sustainable, right regulatory framework, the robust laws, strong corporate governance structure within those sovereign wealth funds, and having the right set of team and insulated from political interference.
The forum confirmed Africa's desire to take control of its own financing tools, marking a shift away from aid dependency towards growth driven by domestic resources and strategic choices.
In Niger, the suspension of livestock exports for the Tabaski has left herds unsold. Herders and exporters are denouncing the impact this measure is having on a key sector of the economy.
Niger has resumed livestock exports after a ban in May 2025 aimed at supplying local markets for Tabaski. But the measures didn't have the expected impact, leaving unsold animals at the Talaje market in Niamey. Herders and exporters like Hama Musa were heavily impacted.
When you take the big sheep, which are generally harder to sell, they cost between 500,000 and 600,000 CFA francs. If you have 100 of them, even assuming a lower price of 150,000 CFA francs per sheep, that already makes 15 million. But from that 15 million, you still have to deduct the initial capital. the running costs, and all other expenses.
The sector accounts for 62% of agricultural exports and employs over 80% of the population. For unions, the decision has counterproductive effects.
Many of us take out bank loans to buy livestock for export to Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire or Gabon. But everything was blocked. One of our colleagues, with more than 400 sheep, had his shipment held up for several days before he could retrieve it.
Livestock support over 80% of the population. The export ban caught herders off guard and directly affected their activity, especially in key producing regions that rely heavily on exports for income. In response, industry professionals are now calling for closer dialogue with the authorities to avoid such decisions further weakening a vital pillar of the country's economy.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Business Africa. To watch this episode again, visit africanews.com and our digital platforms. See you soon.
Business Africa was presented by Turkish Airlines.